Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are looking at a political landscape that feels less like a stable two-party system and more like a series of seismic shifts. Specifically, we are tracking what many are calling an ideological civil war within the Democratic Party. From high-profile primary upsets in New York to organized resistance from centrist factions in Congress, the battle lines are being drawn. But is this a fresh conflict? Or are we just witnessing the final stages of a quiet takeover?
It is the defining question of modern American politics. What we are seeing right now is a classic study in structural realignment. On one side, you have the moderate establishment, desperately trying to hold the line on traditional principles like capitalism, fiscal discipline, and border security. On the other, a highly disciplined, ideologically driven, progressive movement that is systematically winning key primaries. If you analyze this through a strategic framework, this isn't just a series of random electoral upsets. It is a calculated long-term campaign to redefine the very identity of the American left.
Let's start with the catalyst for this latest round of anxiety. The recent primaries in New York have sent shockwaves through the party establishment. Candidates backed by the Democratic Socialists of America secured major victories, unseating well-funded incumbents. The public narrative from the progressive wing is that this is a grassroots, working-class uprising. But when you look closely at the data, the reality is far more complex, isn't it?
Absolutely. The data tells a completely different story, one that challenges the conventional wisdom of class politics. If we look at the demographics of these primary victories, it wasn't the traditional blue-collar working class driving the progressive candidates to victory. In fact, in several key districts, the progressive candidates actually lost the lower income and Hispanic working class neighborhoods by significant margins. Instead, their victories were carried by high-income, college-educated voters, essentially the gentrified areas of Brooklyn and Manhattan.
That is a fascinating paradox. The movement champions working-class rhetoric, yet its actual electoral base consists of highly educated, affluent elites. Why is this specific demographic embracing such radical, anti-systemic positions? What is the psychological or behavioral driver behind this?
It comes down to a behavioral shift among what sociologists call the overcredentialed and underemployed elite. These are individuals who've invested heavily in higher education, often holding advanced degrees in humanities or social sciences, but who find themselves squeezed by the modern economy, struggling with the high cost of urban living, housing, and debt. They feel abandoned by the traditional capitalist system. Consequently, their political alignment shifts from practical economic populism to a more ideological anti-establishment posture. For them, supporting candidates who advocate for dismantling existing structures, whether it is borders, law enforcement, or traditional economic policies, is a way to express their systemic resentment.
So, it is less about practical policy solutions for the working class and more about a cultural and systemic critique of the nation itself. But this shift has triggered a massive counter-reaction. We are seeing centrist Democrats organizing what they call a Promise to America initiative, explicitly pledging allegiance to capitalism over socialism, fiscal responsibility, and strong borders. They are openly warning of an internal war. How do you assess their strategic position?
If we look at this through a SWOT analysis, the moderate faction has significant strengths in terms of donor backing, national appeal, and alignment with the average general election voter. However, their primary weakness is a lack of grassroots mobilization and ideological cohesion. The progressives, by contrast, possess a clear, highly defined mission and objectives, what we call the MOST framework. Their strategy is to target low turnout primaries in deep blue districts where a highly disciplined minority can easily defeat a moderate incumbent who relies on passive establishment support. By the time the general election rolls around, the seat is guaranteed to the Democrat anyway, meaning the progressive wing effectively hijacks the representation of that district.
It is a brilliant tactical maneuver. They do not need to win over the entire country. They just need to win the highly concentrated, low turnout primaries in safe districts. But this brings us to a critical game theory scenario. If you are the leader of the party, like House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, how do you play this hand? Do you confront the insurgents to protect the party's moderate brand, or do you accommodate them to maintain unity?
This is where game theory gets incredibly interesting. The establishment faces a classic payoff matrix. If they wage an all out war against the progressive wing, they risk alienating a highly vocal, media savvy base, which could depress voter turnout in crucial elections and lead to a chaotic House floor. On the other hand, if they accommodate them, they risk normalizing positions that are highly unpopular with the broader American electorate. Looking at recent behavior, the leadership has chosen a strategy of co-optation. By welcoming these new progressive members with open arms, the establishment is attempting to neutralize the threat to their own leadership positions, specifically the path to the Speaker's gavel. They are calculating that keeping them inside the tent, even at the cost of shifting the party's overall platform, is safer than fighting an open insurgency.
But that strategy has massive long-term consequences. If the establishment continuously surrenders its ideological ground to avoid conflict, then the civil war isn't actually ongoing, it is already over. The platform of the progressive wing effectively becomes the default platform of the entire party over time.
Exactly. The line between the fringe and the mainstream completely dissolves. When you look at policies that were considered radical a decade ago, such as a federal wealth tax, universal socialized programs, and highly permissive border policies, they are now openly discussed or implemented by mainstream leaders. The establishment may think they are managing the insurgency, but in reality, they are facilitating a steady structural shift. This is where the pastel and spear frameworks help us see the bigger picture. Politically and socially, this polarization creates a vacuum in the center of American politics.
And that vacuum is dangerous. It leaves millions of traditional, moderate voters feeling completely politically homeless. If one party is moving rapidly toward a highly ideological post-national framework, and the other is consolidating on the right, where does the average citizen go?
They are left with a difficult choice. Historically, American politics has been defined by a broad consensus on basic values: capitalism, national sovereignty, and constitutional processes, with disagreements limited to tax rates, spending, and the scope of government. But when the debate shifts to fundamental questions about the legitimacy of the nation state, the validity of the Constitution, or the preservation of the economic system itself, the democratic process becomes incredibly fragile. It turns into a zero-sum game where compromise is viewed as treason by both sides.
Let's look at the external dimensions of this internal conflict. There have been concerning reports and whistleblower accounts suggesting that external actors, including elements associated with foreign adversaries like the Chinese Communist Party, have sought to engage with or influence progressive organizations within the US. Through a national security lens, how significant is this vulnerability?
It is a critical vulnerability. When a nation's internal political fabric becomes highly polarized and fragmented, it becomes incredibly easy for foreign adversaries to exploit those divisions. They don't need to invent these conflicts, they simply need to amplify them. By supporting or encouraging the most disruptive anti-systemic elements within our political ecosystem, external actors can effectively paralyze American decision-making, weaken social cohesion, and undermine national security from within. It is a classic asymmetric warfare strategy.
It highlights just how high the stakes are. This isn't just a localized debate about municipal policies or primary elections in New York. It is a struggle that directly impacts the stability and future of the Republic. Here at the New Sentinel, this is precisely the kind of deep, multi-layered analysis we strive to bring to our listeners. We believe that understanding these complex global security dynamics and cultural shifts is essential for staying informed in an increasingly volatile world. Whether you are analyzing military strategy or the shifting tides of domestic politics, we want to provide the comprehensive context that mainstream narratives often overlook.
And that is why these conversations are so vital. They force us to look past the daily headlines and examine the underlying structural forces. When you look at the trajectory of this political realignment, it raises a profound question. Can a democratic republic survive when its major political coalitions no longer share a common set of foundational values?
That is the ultimate question we are left with. As we watch this realignment play out, the traditional boundaries of American politics are dissolving. The old alliances are fracturing, and the future of the nation's political landscape remains highly uncertain. Whether this leads to a massive counter-reaction from the center or a complete transformation of the political system is something we will continue to watch closely.
It is a reminder that the stability we often take for granted is highly contingent on the choices made by political actors and voters alike. The road ahead will undoubtedly require a renewed commitment to understanding these deep-seated challenges if we hope to navigate them successfully.
Thank you for joining us for this analysis. We hope this discussion has given you a clearer framework for understanding the complex dynamics reshaping our political world. To our listeners, what do you think? Is the ideological shift we are witnessing an inevitable evolution, or is it a destabilizing force that threatens the core of the Republic? Let us know your thoughts. Tune in, subscribe, and stay informed with us here on the New Sentinel. Until next time.